Music FX, Urgent Cable News, Ticker Beat Narrator, VO. Look closely at the high-altitude skyline of Shanghai's Luzhu Financial District, or the luxury waterfront limits of Shenzhen's Bay Area. You are looking at a 3-block stretch of sheer, vertical wealth. The most expensive residential real estate in the history of mainland China stands in a tight, hyperdense row. These are not just buildings. They are financial instruments made of reinforced concrete and glass curtain walls. The 3 flagship luxury residential supertalls on this block rise to staggering heights: 425 meters, 435 meters, and 472 meters into the low-hanging cloud cover. They were constructed in a breakneck decade-long window between 2012 and 2022. When these exclusive penthouses hit the market, they were snapped up by manufacturing tycoons, tech billionaires, and elite real estate investors for a combined sum running well into the tens of billions of yuan. And right now, at this exact second, every single one of these multi-billion yuan towers is, by design, swaying back and forth in the high-altitude winds. Wind, howl, underweight, or swoosh, let's be completely clear. That movement is not a structural defect. That is precisely what the elite municipal design institutes engineered these megastructures to do. When you build a residential pencil tower with these unprecedented, ultra-slender proportions, the structure must move with the aerodynamic forces, not against them. A completely rigid concrete core at these extreme height-to-width ratios wouldn't just crack, it would suffer catastrophic structural failure. The structural engineers who calculated these load profiles knew it. They wrote the sway directly into the mathematical models. They spent months testing scaled physical prototypes inside advanced wind tunnels at the China Academy of Building Research. And, in 2 of the 3 ultra-luxury towers on this prestigious block, the engineering solution was identical. The contractors installed an absolute engineering marvel near the crown. An enormous, suspended steel counterweight weighing hundreds of metric tons. This massive pendulum is precisely calibrated to swing in the exact opposite direction of the wind forces, absorbing the kinetic energy that would otherwise terrorize the billionaire residents living on the top floors in structural engineering. This device is known as a tuned mass damper, or TMD. Because of these massive pendulums, 2 of these towers managed to damp down the aerodynamic forces within livable comfort limits. But the 3rd tower, the Jade Pinnacle Tower, a structure that generated over 20 billion yuan, 3.1 billion, in gross sales and stood as the absolute crown jewel of luxury high-rises, was rushed to completion without one SFX dramatic BRAC hit. Music drops. This is document number 7. The Billionaire's Row Pencil Tower case file is officially open. The investigative story I am walking you through today is not a standard report about 3 buildings failing under the same structural flaws. It is the exact opposite. This is a technical postmortem of 3 rival luxury supertalls on the exact same city block, confronted by the exact same laws of fluid dynamics. 2 of them solved the crisis with a premium engineering choice. One did not. And the one that skipped the damper is the exact tower where elite owners are currently locked in multi-million yuan lawsuits, where the secondary resale market has experienced a total structural collapse, and where official legal filings allege deliberate, systemic fraud. The engineering decision that separates these mega properties is completely invisible from the street level. It requires sacrificing prime, high-altitude real estate to house the single most expensive piece of mechanical and structural hardware a residential supertall can install. The central question this case file demands an answer to is simple. Why did the most expensive luxury residential tower in the region go up without it? To understand how this happened, you have to look at what happens when fast-moving atmospheric winds strike a hyper-slender glass tower. As air hitches against the sharp corners of a building at high altitudes, it doesn't just flow smoothly around the facade. At critical velocities, the airflow detaches from the glass curtain wall, generating alternating columns of rotating, low-pressure air pockets on opposite sides of the structure. These low-pressure zones peel away from alternate corners in a violent, repeating aerodynamic cycle. Engineers call this phenomenon von Karman vortex shedding, SFX, whooshing synth, cyclical beat in plain terms. The wind grabs the luxury skyscraper from one side, let's go, grabs it from the opposite side, let's go, and cycles at a fixed frequency dictated entirely by wind velocity and the building's outer geometry. If that external aerodynamic frequency happens to lock into perfect alignment with the natural oscillation frequency of the building's concrete core, the tower enters a state of high-amplitude resonance. The skyscraper begins to sway violently, with each wind cycle actively reinforcing the momentum of the next. If you are dealing with a standard stout commercial tower with a traditional height-to-width aspect ratio of 5:1 or 7:1, the building's sheer cross-sectional mass absorbs these dynamic forces passively. The wind hits the facade, the vortex sheds, and the office workers inside barely feel a millimeter of movement, but the Jade Pinnacle Tower is not a stout building. It rises 425 meters into the sky on a foundational footprint that is a mere 28 meters square. That gives this residential monolith a terrifying slenderness ratio of approximately 15:1 times. The architectural threshold of standard high-rise engineering. 2 blocks away, its direct competitor, the ultra-luxury Phoenix Ribbon Tower, is even more extreme, soaring 435 meters into the atmosphere on a knife-edge base just 18 meters wide. That creates a slenderness ratio of 24:1, making it one of the thinnest skyscrapers on Earth. Both Supertall share the exact same microclimate, the exact same typhoon force wind risks, and the exact same physics. They were forced to confront these forces at proportions that no residential towers in human history had ever attempted before. There are only 2 recognized ways to engineer your way out of this aerodynamic trap. The first method is to physically disrupt the wind's grip on the structure before it can lock into resonance. Engineers achieve this by sacrificing entire floors every 12 stories, leaving them completely unclad as open air, louvered mechanical voids. The wind passes straight through the building, breaking up the alternating low-pressure pockets before they can trigger a cyclical rhythm. The second method is to let the tower sway, and then physically catch it mid-motion. You hang a massive hundreds-of-ton steel pendulum near the upper penthouse levels, suspended on high-tensile steel cables, or mounted on complex hydraulic tracks. As the building tilts to the left under a massive wind gust, the internal mass slides to the right, neutralizing the kinetic energy before the acceleration forces hit the human nervous system of the residents inside. The rival Phoenix Ribbon Tower, designed by elite regional architecture groups with structural engineering executed by a top-tier national design bureau, installed a massive tuned mass damper weighing approximately 800 metric tons. These systems are not experimental. They are the globally recognized benchmark for Supertall livability. Yet, when the developers of the Jade Pinnacle Tower submitted their final blueprints, they chose a fundamentally different path. They opted for the first approach alone. 5 double-height open mechanical voids cut into the tower's sleek profile to let the wind blow through. No massive internal pendulum was specified. The design passed the wind tunnel simulations on paper. The local Housing Bureau and Municipal Construction Commission signed off on the structural safety permits, and the city issued the final certificates of occupancy. Every bureaucrat in the regulatory chain checked the boxes required by the building codes of the era. But the physical reality of living at 400 meters in a building, engineered without a tuned MOS S-damper, was about to collide violently with the marketing promises of the developer. The alternative engineering fix, the open mechanical floors, was about to turn this multi-billion yuan asset into an unlivable, structurally agonizing nightmare for China's ultra-wealthy elite. Before we dive deep into the specific structural failures documented inside the court records, I want to pose a question directly to you. If you had paid 600 million yuan, 88 million, for a triplex penthouse in a 425-meter tower, and you discovered that the more slender building 2 blocks down remained completely motionless because it had an 800-ton damper your developer cut from the budget, would you consider that an actionable construction defect, or would you consider it the risk you inherently took when buying into unproven engineering? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them, because the answer to that question is exactly where this massive legal battle is headed.
.sec.
Urgent, radar pulse, music FX, Low systemic deep. Freak, hum narrator. V. To truly unpack the technical decay of the Jade Pinnacle Tower, we have to look past the gold leaf elevator lobbies and dive directly into the engineering chronology. We have to look at the raw structural data, the millimeters of foundation settlement, the thousands of cubic meters of high-performance concrete, and the exact timestamps when this multi-billion yuan engineering experiment began to unravel. The groundbreaking ceremony took place in the spring of 2012. The developer, a high-flying real estate conglomerate led by billionaire tycoon Chairman Zhang, marketed the project as the architectural monument of the 21st century. The construction timeline was relentless, matching the legendary speed of elite Tier 1 Chinese developments. The Municipal Construction Commission watched as the main contractor poured foundation piles deep into the urban bedrock, utilizing ultra-high-strength C80 concrete to form the hyper-dense 28-meter square structural core. By late 2015, the tower had topped out at 425 meters. The state-backed inspection agencies conducted their initial structural safety checks. On paper, the building was a masterpiece of rigid engineering. But inside the structural design files, a hidden countdown timer had already started ticking. The core problem with engineering a 15:1 slenderness ratio purely around open-air mechanical voids, without the stabilizing assistance of a heavy-tuned mass damper, is that you are forcing the building's internal utilities to bear the literal brunt of nature. To understand what this means in numbers, look at the architectural floor plans. Every 12 stories, the building's glass curtain wall completely stops. It exposes the bare, unclad concrete structural columns and the massive internal utility lines to the open atmosphere. That affects high-altitude wind reverb at an elevation of 300 to 400 meters above the city streets. The atmospheric conditions are brutal. The temperature differentials between the interior residential zones and the open-air mechanical gaps can swing by as much as 40 degrees Celsius within a single 24-hour cycle. When winter storms hit the region, the high-velocity wind chill drops the temperature inside those exposed structural voids to sub-zero levels within minutes. And that is exactly when the mechanical systems began to fail. The first localized system alerts occurred in the winter of 2017, less than 24 months after the first wave of ultra-wealthy buyers took delivery of their keys. The initial complaints submitted to the luxury property management team weren't about catastrophic structural cracks. They were about acoustics. Residents living on the upper penthouse levels, floors 75 through 88, began reporting an ominous, low-frequency structural groaning. Whenever regional wind speeds exceeded 60 kilometers per hour, the high-altitude airflow racing through the open mechanical floors turned the entire tower into a massive concrete pan flute. SFX, metallic stress. Creaking according to internal board meeting minutes leaked from the building's elite owners committee, the high-velocity air vortexes passing through the building created intense acoustic vibrations inside the residential walls. The internal water piping networks began to vibrate so violently that water inside executive bathtubs would visibly ripple in resonance. The metal partitions separating the main mechanical risers began to warp, but it was the building's central trash chute that provided the most shocking daily disruption. To maintain the building's pristine exterior aesthetic, the architects designed a single, continuous 400-meter vertical trash drop with zero horizontal offsets or kinetic brake flaps. Internal logs reveal that when a single heavy bag of refuse was dropped from the 80th floor, the speed of the descent, combined with the high-velocity air pressure pushing up from the lower levels, caused the bag to break the sound barrier inside the chute. Owners reported that every time a neighbor took out the garbage, it sounded like an artillery shell detonating inside their living room walls. By mid-2018, the acoustic issues escalated into severe structural and utility failures. The extreme temperature variations on the open mechanical floors began to trigger intense thermal expansion and contraction cycles across the primary plumbing lines. The high-performance steel and polymer pipes were expanding and shrinking by several millimeters every day. On October 14, 2018, at exactly 3:14 a.m., a massive high-pressure water pipe running through the open mechanical space on the 74th floor suffered a total structural rupture. SFX. Cataclysmic water burst. Alarm. Millions of liters of pressurized water flooded down into the primary electrical risers and the residential lift shafts. 4 days later, while emergency engineering crews were still drying out the lower distribution panels, a secondary water line fractured on the 60th floor mechanical void, sending a cascade of water crashing through floors 55 down to 42. In total, 35 multi-million yuan luxury apartments suffered catastrophic interior water damage. The imported marble floorboards warped, custom Italian plaster walls liquefied, and automated smart home systems short-circuited. The building's vertical transit infrastructure was completely crippled. 2 of the tower's 4 main high-speed residential elevator shafts were completely submerged in water, knocking the electronics offline for nearly 3 consecutive weeks. The local property insurance pool reevaluated the risk profile of the Jade Pinnacle Tower almost overnight, raising the building's comprehensive insurance premiums by a staggering 300% over the next 2 years. Then came the terrifying wind event of October 31, 2019. A late-season regional gale sent high-altitude wind gusts screaming against the glass facade at over 110 kilometers per hour. As the building began its calculated aerodynamic sway, the internal structural sensors registered a lateral deflection of nearly 70 centimeters at the top floors. The high-speed elevators were programmed to automatically slow down during high-deflection events to prevent the counterweight cables from tangling. A prominent logistics tycoon, returning to his 80th floor apartment, stepped into the lift cab just as a massive wind gust struck the tower. The automated safety systems locked down instantly. The car ground to a dead halt, trapping the owner inside a dark, vibrating metal box suspended 300 meters above the pavement. Because of the intense lateral swaying of the lift cables, rescue technicians from the municipal fire department could not manually override the hoistway. The resident remained trapped between floors for exactly 1 hour and 25 minutes, listening to the high tensile steel cables scrape against the concrete shafts as the building swayed around him. SFX. Metallic cable tension rattle. By September of 2021, the Elite Owners Committee had reached its breaking point. Utilizing top-tier corporate legal firms, they bypassed the property management company and filed a massive civil lawsuit against the developer group, demanding 1.6 billion yuan, $250 million, in immediate structural rectification damages. The initial legal brief documented over 1,500 distinct architectural, mechanical, and design defects. The plaintiffs used language rarely seen in high-end Chinese civil courts, characterizing the tower as one of the most severe examples of systemic sponsor malfeasance and structural oversight in the history of modern urban development. The developer group fired back immediately. In an official corporate press statement, they vehemently rejected the lawsuit, calling the litigation unwarranted and highly sensationalized. They described the Jade Pinnacle Tower not as a defective structure, but as a masterpiece of state-of-the-art structural engineering, a sophisticated, highly sensitive symphony of advanced building systems that simply requires routine fine-tuning as the concrete core achieves its final permanent settlement. They flatly denied any financial or structural liability for the internal system failures. The legal warfare was just beginning, as the case ground through the municipal court system, generating over 4 million pages of technical depositions. A bombshell discovery was made. In April of 2025, the Owners Committee filed a secondary, far more aggressive lawsuit for 1.1 billion yuan, $165 million. This new 46-page legal complaint was backed by an independent, highly detailed facade and structural health survey. It completely abandoned the polite terminology of construction delays and replaced it with a chilling, definitive legal phrase, deliberate and systemic fraud, according to the 2025 court filings. A secret internal facade survey conducted by the main contractor back in 2016, while the developer was actively selling the remaining luxury penthouses to unsuspecting buyers, had identified a terrifying reality. The survey had flagged exactly 1,893 distinct physical and structural defects throughout the external glass and concrete envelope. Crucially, more than half of those documented defects were explicitly classified under national engineering guidelines as class life safety risks. The lawsuit alleges that the developer intentionally buried this report, hiding the structural defects from potential buyers to protect their remaining profit margins. Furthermore, the legal team uncovered a calculated, single-word alteration in the official offering plans and sales contracts. In the initial promotional materials and technical specifications provided to early investors, the contract stated that the outer structural envelope utilized high-performance reinforced concrete that will prevent deep water penetration. But in the final contracts signed by later buyers, the wording was quietly altered to high-performance reinforced concrete that was designed to prevent water penetration. A single word changed from will to design to. A calculated legal shield deployed by the developer's legal department, because the Y allegedly knew the physical concrete was already failing to keep the elements out. Even more alarming, the latest 2025 independent engineering survey alleges that high-altitude rainwater has successfully infiltrated the primary vertical structural columns. The moisture has bypassed the external sealing barriers, reaching the internal structural skeleton where the high-tensile steel rebar inside the reinforced concrete is now actively corroding. If left untreated, this oxidation process will cause the concrete to spall, permanently degrading the structural capacity of the core. The developer group has released a terse statement stating they vehemently deny these new allegations and will aggressively move to have the 2025 complaint dismissed in its entirety. The case remains stuck in judicial gridlock with no final ruling in sight. But out in the real world, the laws of physics do not wait for a judge's signature. The physical reality of the missing 800-ton pendulum was about to trigger an economic collapse that no real estate marketing campaign could fix. SFX, drum hit. Music shifts to low, tensed beat. Music SFX, drum hit. Urban soundscape narrator. VO, if you have watched this far into the case file, you know exactly what kind of channel this is. We do not look at these multi-billion yuan high-rise crises in isolation. We look at the systemic patterns across the entire structural landscape of modern China. Because the true tragedy of the Jade Pinnacle Tower is that its structural vulnerability is not unique. It is part of a broader, high-altitude architectural crisis currently playing out across the mega-cities of the mainland. To understand why the Jade Pinnacle Tower's missing 800-ton pendulum is such a devastating engineering omission, we have to look at how other premier Chinese supertalls handled the exact same laws of physics. Look at the undisputed titan of the modern Chinese skyline, the 632-meter Shanghai Tower in Pudong. When the elite state-backed architects designed that structure, they knew they were building in a primary typhoon strike zone. They didn't just rely on one defensive strategy. First, they twisted the exterior glass curtain wall by exactly 120 degrees as it rises, a brilliant aerodynamic profile that physically reduces wind loads on the building by 24%. SFX, wind speed simulation, whoosh! But they didn't stop there. Deep within the crown of the Shanghai Tower, at the 105th floor, they installed a world-first engineering marvel, a 1,000 metric ton tuned mass damper. It is suspended by 12 high-tensile steel cables, stabilized by massive electromagnetic permanent magnets that generate eddy currents to damp down the building's sway during extreme weather events. Go south to Shenzhen, to the 599-meter Ping'an Finance Center. Same problem, same world-class solution. Inside its crown sits a massive multi-million yuan internal pendulum calibrated to counteract high-altitude typhoons coming off the South China Sea, even on the exact same city block as our failing Jade Pinnacle Tower. The rival 435-meter Phoenix Ribbon Tower, the thinnest skyscraper on Earth with that mind-bending 24:1 slenderness ratio, proves that advanced engineering works perfectly when it is actually funded. The engineers at the National Design Bureau installed an 800-ton tuned mass damper at the upper penthouse levels during the intense regional gales of 2019, while the Jade Pinnacle Tower was swaying wildly by nearly 70 centimeters, trapping residents in elevators and fracturing high-pressure water lines. The Phoenix Ribbon Tower next door remained virtually stationary, Its massive 800-ton steel pendulum absorbed the kinetic energy, sliding silently on its hydraulic tracks, keeping the acceleration forces inside the ultra-luxury apartments well below the human threshold of perception. The residents of the Phoenix Ribbon Tower live with high-altitude motion, but they live with it in absolute structural comfort. They have not organized a 1.1 billion yuan class action lawsuit against their developer. Their secondary resale market hasn't collapsed. So why did the Jade Pinnacle Tower go up without this standard piece of modern high-rise engineering? The answer is not hidden behind an encrypted email chain or a corrupt corporate server. It is hidden in plain sight inside the regulatory architecture of the local housing bureau and the Municipal Construction Commission .sfx. Industrial stress beat. Here is the most critical underappreciated regulatory gap in the entire luxury real estate sector. The national and municipal building codes contain absolute, legally enforceable thresholds for structural safety. They do not, however, contain enforceable thresholds for residential wind comfort. Let that sink in for a moment. The Municipal Construction Commission reviews blueprints to ensure a tower will not physically collapse under catastrophic loads. It checks the grade of the concrete, the layout of the steel rebar, and the foundational load capacity. But the regulatory framework does not govern whether the rhythmic sway inside that building is compatible with someone actually living in it. Without experiencing severe motion sickness, hearing structural groaning, or experiencing internal utility failures, the Jade Pinnacle Tower completely satisfied every single applicable building code requirement of its era. On paper, it was officially certified as safe. Yet, at the exact same time, by its own residents' accounts, the building was practically unlivable during routine wind events. This regulatory gap was written into the high-rise codes during an era when residential pencil towers of these extreme slenderness ratios simply did not exist. Historically, residential blocks in major Chinese cities were built as wide, dense, stout multi-family structures. When Supertalls were constructed, they were almost exclusively commercial office towers, where the cost of a massive tuned mass damper could be easily amortized across thousands of corporate tenants, and where employees leave at 5 p.m. Nobody updated the regulatory framework when private luxury developers realized they could build ultra-slender pencil towers on tiny urban footprints, selling single-floor penthouses to individual billionaires for historic profits. By the time the operational defects at the Jade Pinnacle Tower became public knowledge, multiple other residential Supertalls had already cleared planning permission and were under construction on the exact same block. This brings us to a parallel structural crisis that has shaken the confidence of real estate investors across mainland China. The famous case of the Seg Plaza in Shenzhen. FX systematic alerts ping on May 18, 2021. The 356-meter Seg Plaza in Shenzhen's Huaqibei Electronics District suddenly began to vibrate and sway violently on a completely clear day with virtually no wind. Terrified citizens recorded footage of thousands of people fleeing the tower in a state of total panic. The municipal government instituted an immediate occupancy ban, completely sealing the building for months, while the China Academy of Building Research and elite engineering institutes conducted an exhaustive forensic investigation. The structural findings were highly revealing. The engineers discovered that the tower did not have a fundamental structural defect that would cause a collapse. Instead, it was experiencing a severe resonance issue caused by two distinct factors: the high-frequency vibration of a pair of heavy mechanical masts installed on the roof, and the localized wind patterns creating vortex shedding that perfectly matched the building's natural frequency. The solution? Workers completely dismantled the rooftop masts and retrofitted a massive internal damping system into the upper levels of the tower. Only then was the occupancy ban lifted. But here is the devastating difference between the commercial crisis at Seg Plaza and the luxury residential crisis at the Jade Pinnacle Tower. Seg Plaza was an office tower with a massive, centralized corporate ownership structure and direct state oversight. The remediation could be executed by municipal mandate. At the Jade Pinnacle Tower, you are dealing with a fractured community of private, ultra-wealthy buyers who paid hundreds of millions of yuan each for private real estate, under active litigation with a private developer group that denies all liability. And, as we will unpack in the next part of this file, the physical reality of retrofitting an 800-ton steel pendulum into a fully completed, occupied luxury tower at 400 meters of elevation is an engineering and financial impossibility. When the regulatory code only protects you from total collapse, but completely ignores your everyday livability, who is actually looking out for the buyer? The state inspectors who check the boxes? The private architects who signed off on the wind tunnel models? Or the developer who pocketed a reported 2 billion yuan in clear profit before the water pipes began to shatter? Let me know your perspective in the comments. We are moving into the personal accounts, the dramatic evacuations, and the massive financial damage figures that have completely redefined the value of luxury real estate on Billionaires Row.fx. Dramatic slam past. Music FX. Industrial drum slam. Wind howl narrator. To truly appreciate the scale of this high-altitude crisis, we have to look past the cold physics of vortex shedding and examine the human wreckage inside the Jade Pinnacle Tower. We need to look at the personal testimonies documented within the municipal judicial archives, the real-world accounts of elite Chinese families who discovered that their multi-million yuan pinnacle of luxury was entirely fragile. Let's begin with the testimony of Mr. Li, a tech venture capitalist who paid a jaw-dropping 410 million yuan, 60 million, for a full-floor duplex apartment on the 78th floor. According to his court deposition, he believed he was purchasing the quietest, most secure sanctuaries in all of mainland China. Instead, he found himself living inside an echo chamber of structural failure. Low, distant, metallic groaning Mr. Li's personal logs detail how the high-altitude weather patterns turned his daily life into an exhausting psychological battle. During a severe seasonal typhoon event in July of 2022, wind gusts hitting the glass curtain wall at 400 meters elevation generated extreme aerodynamic forces. Because the building lacked a tuned mass damper to actively absorb the energy, the structure began its calculated 70-centimeter lateral sway. Inside Mr. Li's apartment, the effects were immediate and terrifying. The structural concrete core groaned with a deep, low-frequency resonance that vibrated through the floorboards. The custom-engineered glass panels of the curtain wall flexed under the wind pressure, creating a high-pitched, metallic whistling sound as atmospheric air forced its way through the microscopic gaps in the exterior sealant. But it was the mechanical movement inside the living spaces that truly broke his confidence. Mr. Li testified that his custom-built internal doors, meticulously hung by imported contractors, began to warp out of square as the building frame deflected. During the peak of the storm, doors would spontaneously pop open or become completely jammed within their steel frames. Heavy crystal chandeliers suspended from the 5-meter-high ceilings swung in a slow, ominous arc, mimicking the pendulum the developer had failed to install at the top of the tower. The motion sickness was so severe that his family had to flee down the high-speed lift shafts to check into a nearby luxury hotel just to sleep without experiencing nausea. SFX, cracking ceramic. Water die-cripping. Even more catastrophic was the experience of Mrs. Chen, a high-end jewelry manufacturing matriarch who owned the entire 64th floor. Her luxury residence became ground zero for the building's most famous utility disaster. On that icy morning of October 14, 2018, when the primary high-pressure water riser on the 74th floor mechanical void suffered its total structural rupture due to intense thermal contraction, the resulting cascade of pressurized water didn't just drip through her ceiling, it tore it completely apart. According to municipal emergency response records, thousands of liters of treated water, pressurized to over 40 atmospheres to reach the upper heights of the Supertall, breached the floor slabs. Mrs. Chen's 50 million yuan custom interior fit-out was completely destroyed within an hour. The water dissolved the sound-deadening drywall partitions, buckled the rare, exotic hardwood flooring imported from South America, and permanently short-circuited her automated smart home servers. The water didn't stop there. It flooded directly into the main elevator lobbies, creating a vertical waterfall that poured down the open elevator shafts. The high-speed lift cables, engineered to travel at speeds of up to 10 meters per second, were completely coated in high-pressure water, forcing the automatic braking systems to lock down. Mrs. Chen and her staff had to evacuate the building via the emergency concrete stairwells, walking down 64 flights of stairs in total darkness while water cascaded over their shoes. The financial damage ledger compiled by the independent forensic surveyors for the municipal court reveals the staggering cost of these failures. The Jade Pinnack, Le Tower, documented damage and operational costs asset, system affected nature of damage, failure direct financial impact luxury residential units, floors 4286, 35 premium apartments hit by high-pressure pipe ruptures, destroyed marble, buckled flooring, collapsed ceilings. Yo 66 million thousand, 9.7 million. Vertical transit infrastructure total immersion of 2 out of 4 high-speed residential elevator shafts, shorted electronics, warped hoistway rails. Yo 500,000 comprehensive property insurance risk, profile reevaluation by Tier 1 Chinese insurance consortia, following repeated systemic flooding events, 300% premium increase secondary, market resale values high floor transaction, data following public disclosure of the 1,893 facade defects and pending litigation 35% to 50% loss in value narrator VO. These numbers aren't just statistics, they represent a total destruction of equity for some of the most influential economic figures in the region. The luxury real estate market relies entirely on the illusion of absolute permanence and prestige. When that illusion shatters, the market corrects with brutal, unyielding velocity. Consider the case of Mr. Wang, a prominent green energy tycoon who attempted to liquidate his 79th floor property in late 2023. His apartment had an original off-plan purchase price of 920 million yuan to 135 million. During the peak of the billionaire's row market boom. Following the public disclosure of the Philippine 500 construction defects in the first lawsuit, prospective buyers completely vanished. Mr. Wang cut his asking price to 630 million yuan. No takers. He cut it again to 450 million yuan. Finally, in October of 2023, the hammer fell. The property sold for a mere 447 million yuan, less than half of its original purchase price. A real estate loss of nearly 500 million yuan on a single residential transaction, executing a massive downwards reset for the entire block. SFX. Heavy record hit. Tense ambient, even more historic is the ongoing saga of the ultimate triplex penthouse, the 87th floor crown jewel purchased by an international retail billionaire in 2016 for 598 million yuan, 87.7 million. The property has been actively listed for sale on the secondary market since 2021. The sales representatives initially tried to market it as a rare trophy asset, pricing it at over 1.15 billion yuan. As the legal filings intensified, the price was slashed to 885 million yuan. Then it was hacked down again to 715 million yuan. According to the most recent high-end real estate brokerage reports out of Shanghai and Shenzhen, even at these massive discounts, the penthouse is effectively toxic. The global elite, the tech founders, the private equity managing directors, the shipping magnates, have all reviewed the structural survey records and the pending 2025 fraud lawsuit, and they have walked away from the closing table. They realize that no amount of luxury leather wall covering can disguise a building whose internal steel skeleton is fighting an active battle against water infiltration and high-altitude aerodynamic sway. The developer group continues to claim that these real estate market corrections are simply part of a macroeconomic shift in the broader high-end property sector. They maintain that the building is perfectly sound and that the complaints have been blown out of proportion by an aggressive owners' committee seeking to avoid their monthly maintenance assessments. But the architectural evidence presented by the municipal engineering surveyors tells a far more permanent story. The structural core cannot be altered. The concrete poured during that frantic construction rush between 2012 and 2015 is now a permanent fixture of the urban skyline. And the choice to leave out that 800-ton mass damper is a decision that cannot be undone by any legal settlement or corporate press release. .sfx urgent radar signal. Music effects, low ominous synth drone narrator VO. This is where the file reaches its ultimate unyielding conclusion. We have to look beyond the immediate litigation, past the ruined marble of the upper penthouses, and confront the future scenario facing the Jade Pinnacle Tower and the wider high-rise landscape across modern China. Because as the legal clock ticks deeper into 2026, the structural reality remains completely unchanged. The building is exactly what it was designed to be, and it cannot be altered. The most devastating piece of technical data to emerge from the Municipal Engineering Archives is this. There is a category of structural remediation that, by the laws of physics, simply cannot be performed. A tuned mass damper, the massive 800-ton steel pendulum that the rival Phoenix Ribbon Tower installed during its initial structural framing, cannot now be retrofitted into a fully completed, completely clad, an occupied residential tower at 400 meters of elevation. SFX, heavy industrial beat to install a system of that scale today would require dismantling the upper 5 floors of the tower, ripping out the primary mechanical concrete slabs, using heavy high-altitude crawler cranes that cannot operate safely at those wind velocities, and completely evacuating the multi-million yuan residential units below for multiple years. There is no viable engineering pathway and certainly no cost-effective financial framework to introduce that missing mass to the top of the Jade Pinnacle Tower. The missing pendulum question is permanent. The building's extreme 15:1 slenderness ratio is permanently locked into the high-performance concrete core poured a decade ago, and that leaves the residents trapped inside a tragic engineering paradox. The open-air mechanical voids, the unique architectural choice that the developers used to bypass the cost of the tuned mass damper, actually did exactly what the structural engineers designed them to do. They successfully disrupted the von Karman vortex shedding. They allowed the tower to survive typhoon-force wind loads without suffering a catastrophic collapse. The engineering institutes were technically correct. The mathematical models were accurate. The structural brief was met. The tragic consequence, however, is that the very fix that saved the building from falling over is the exact mechanism that is destroying its operational systems from the inside out. By leaving those massive mechanical floors entirely open to the elements every 12 stories, the design exposed every critical utility system, every pressurized water run, every main electrical conduit, and every structural column to a brutal, high-altitude marine and urban environment year after year. The system failures didn't happen despite the engineering choice. They happened because of it. The fix was the failure. Drum hit, metallic clang. The broader lesson of this luxury residential block reaches far beyond a single tower or a single billionaire's lost equity. It reveals that the modern real estate industry has spent a decade building an entirely new class of high-altitude assets for which the historic regulatory framework was never designed. The building codes of major Tier 1 cities were written for a traditional era. An era when residential high-rises were stout blocks that didn't flex in the wind, and when buildings were sold to local families as long-term homes, not as global investment instruments where minor structural movements compound into massive civil lawsuits. By the time the structural gap between wind tunnel theory and real-world livability became visible to the elite buyers, the concrete had cured. The developer group had collected their billions in profit. The elite architects had moved on to their next international commissions, and the structure was left standing exactly as designed. The 800-ton pendulum either was or was not written into the original blueprints. Now, the entire file comes down to the second question I posed near the beginning of our investigation. The question that every prospective high-end real estate investor must now answer for themselves before wire transferring their fortunes. If you had hundreds of millions of yuan to invest in real estate today, and you were offered the ultimate triplex penthouse at the Jade Pinnacle Tower, at a massive 50% discount, a property that meets every municipal code, that is officially certified as structurally safe, but that sways dramatically in high gales, without the stabilizing pendulum its neighbor has, a building with 1,893 documented facade defects under active litigation, where water is actively reaching the internal rebar, and where the developer group vehemently denies everything, would you take the deal? At what exact financial discount does the sheer prestige of a 400-meter skyline view finally outweigh the permanent structural baggage of a missing pendulum? Because somewhere out there, right now, an ultra-wealthy buyer is sitting down with their wealth managers, looking at a listing for a high-floor apartment inside this tower, and answering that exact question in real time. Drop your final answers and your structural theories in the comments section below. The debate down there is the entire point of opening this file. Cable News ticker rumble, out to black.